we were talking a little bit about the USAID situation before we got on, and I mean, I'm fascinated by all this because I've been yelling off the mountaintop about NGOs for years, and I showed a chart the other night that showed like in 1948 there were 40 NGOs, and now today there's like 5,000 of them. How much do you know about like how this monster just got out of control? And like, we know the CIA kind of operates through them and stuff. So is it kind of like the off the books, like military things where they get contractors to do the things that they can't do for them?
There's a lot in your question.
Yeah,
First,
no.
with there's a ton right there. We could talk for hours on just answering that, and we scratch the surface. But with NGOs, like anybody can set up an NGO. So there's nothing wrong with NGOs as non-governmental organizations. It's a private foundation, or it's a network of people, or a network of groups. It's when somebody in position of authority takes our tax dollars and uses those NGOs as instruments of US policy. And that can
Mm,
be important too, if you for diplomatic reasons or commercial reasons or intelligence reasons or anything else. Those they have their roles. But it's when they get out of control, that's the
mm,
problem. It's like when, we need an intelligence service. We need what the FBI does, but not when they're out of control. So when something like USAID, which most people don't even think of and probably haven't even heard
mm.
of, but when it's discovered that it's an illegal slush fund for tens of billions of dollars a year that's handed out without any accountability to these
Yeah.
favored networks of NGOs and other people around them and politicians and news organizations that benefit financially from it, then you've got something really messed up with our system, and it has to be cut off at the throat.
Oh yeah, and I mean, how deep do you think this goes? Because I mean, we saw the thing with Politico, we saw the allegations about BBC, like, and I always wondered like, why is it that these select media networks they'll like come out with a barrage of like a pretty similar headline when things happen? Like, do you think it's possible that pretty much every single mainstream media outlet was receiving money from something like this?
Well, it's not always money. A lot of it's a crowd mentality, and when people think similarly or they're after a similar goal, there'll be a leader of it or a couple leaders of it, and then the rest of them follow the lead, which is why I say the Associated Press is so important because it provides news to small newspapers and organizations that can't afford their own reporters, or even to big ones that can't cover it. So something like AP, and then that controls the style guide to how to use words in journalism that most news organizations follow that style guide. So you take control of something like AP, then you can influence far beyond your ability to do so as just one outlet. And then you have the big ones like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post and so forth. So they have a pack mentality. Think they've gone to similar journalism schools. We know what journalism schools are like. They're at
Right.
big organizations where the editorial board is skewed a certain way. And so the schools they teach and train these people to think a certain way. They don't think for themselves for the most part. Having gone to
Right.
journalism school, I learned early on that you're not rewarded for independent critical thinking. And then
Yeah.
and then the advertisers, look at who the advertisers are. So then you have people like in USAID who also think the same way, and you set up special subscription services. So we'll provide you not just with the news, but with insider newsletters and what's going on in legislation, which, by the way, is a free resource that other government agencies already do for people in the government. But all these deluxe things, so you're not paying $200 a year per subscription. You're paying 10,000 a year for this
Yeah.
special subscription. That Politico has one, New York Times has one, who knows who else has one. But it's all a grift, it's all a payoff system. And once these news organizations, even if it's a small portion of their income,
Hmm.
it's still a substantial portion of their income because you saw the day AID was cut was the day Politico said we can't meet
Yeah.
payroll this week. So that's state-funded media, but it's covertly done. Like it's
Right.
being run exactly like we would run intelligence operations against other countries. But instead, USAID has become a covert operations unit all its own, accountable to nobody, using American taxpayer dollars to operate against American taxpayers.
Right, and it's like this whole thing was a mirage where they're, creating like they put out headlines, they pay people to protest, like it's they're creating this whole false reality, and then on the same side, on the other side, they're trying to suppress the actual will of the people with like censorship and whatnot, and fact checking this and that. So it's crazy that we're using our own money to do that to us in that heavy of a way.
Yeah.
Uh,
And this is
the-
something that nobody knew because
mm,
USAID's been around since 1961. Okay, so
yeah,
President Kennedy started it as a way to combat communist subversion around the world to prevent the Soviet Union from expanding to choke us off. So it made a
right.
lot of sense. Help the poor. We're a wealthy country. We might have a moral obligation, or at least there's a bipartisan consensus for it. But we're also combating Soviet expansionism right where the Soviets are aiming at the poor people of the world. So it made a lot of sense, not just for humanitarian relief, but for development, so they wouldn't always live in poverty. So it served a role as long as it was answerable to the Secretary of State and to the president.
Hmm.
Then it comes off, like in anytime in government where you don't have some expert on something or you don't have somebody with the technical skills, you bring somebody in on contract to do it. It might be for a day. It's like when you call the plumber at home, right? You're not going to keep a plumber in your employment the whole time, but that one day a year you're going to need him and you call him in, and that's fine. That it saves taxpayer money. It makes things more efficient. And you might even hire somebody for a couple of years or two if there's something going on and they don't want to go into the civil service and they want to keep their own lives as professionals. That's all understandable, but when they're not needed anymore, you don't keep contracting them. And so
Right.
what they've ended up doing is they have a contracting industry. Here's the real sick part that I haven't seen a whole lot of attention to yet.
Hmm.
Let's say you're a USAID contracting officer and you're running a $100 million a year set of contracts,
Yeah.
and you've put in your 20 years government service, so you get your pension, and you're making, say, you're a GS-15, that's a grade scale level, senior most before you get into the executives. You get a like $160,000 a year package. You can retire after 20 years, and you get a really nice, about 100,000 plus a year pension for the rest of your life. But then
Mm,
you go and set up your own NGO, or you
mm,
join an NGO and you apply to or you set up your own private contracting company, and then you apply for the very grants and contracts that you were administering before, that's run by your former subordinate who has just been elevated to take your place. So it's this cronyism with no oversight. Now, you can pay yourself. The US government allows, by law, it allows executives of contractors to make up to $650,000 a year, roughly a little more, like 664,000, some crazy amount a year. So
wow.
you can pay yourself $664,000 a year, plus make a 10% off the top of the value of the whole contract. So if you get a $10 million contract to do something, you can pay yourself 664,000, and then you get 10% of that 10 million, which is, so you're making $1.6 million
Wow.
a year fresh out of government. So that becomes people's goals. And
Yeah.
it's a whole network that way. And then, oh, let's help Senator so and so get reelected. So we'll max out and we'll give the most to his campaign. So everything's happy, everything's tidy, and it's all big one happy family as long as everybody just shuts up.
Wow, and that's why we're getting this like belligerent response out of a lot of these Congress people, like they're like where they're outside screaming, telling people
Yeah.
to come rush the Capitol. We need millions of people here because like, and it's funny because they don't even know what to say because the explanation for it isn't like something that the people are going to want to hear.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah. The sick thing. So I looked at all of the senators and the congressmen who were there, and
yeah,
almost all of them were Beltway bandits. So around Washington, D.C., you have the Beltway, the highway that circles the city.
yeah,
Beltway bandits are people who are contractors and they set up their own business around the Beltway in
mm,
Virginia, Northern Virginia, and Maryland. So you had who? You had the senator from Maryland, who happens to be the ranking Democrat on the subcommittee that what? Oversees USAID, but also
wow,
sits on the appropriations committee that provides the money to USAID. And his own state takes in billions and billions of dollars per year on just USAID contracts. So he's there representing them. The same thing with one of the senators from Virginia, exact same deal. Congressman Jamie Raskin. He's got a $1 billion a year AID contractor right in his district, not just one, but 5 or 6 of them that I've seen so far. I've been to some of their offices, so it's. I mean, I'm not. So of course he's out there, but they're all saying, "Oh, the poor are going to be hurt." Only 10% of whatever goes to its intended, purposes. So you think, how many people can you feed in Ethiopia for $664,000 a year? Right?
yeah.
It's a
Oh
scam.
my god. And if you enjoyed the short clip, click right here to watch the full episode, and remember to subscribe to the channel. God bless.